The man ahead of him in line turned around, looked him up and down, and turned back. That was it. No confrontation, no words. Just that look, the one that takes a full second and says everything without saying anything at all. The DMV on Salem Avenue in Dayton, Ohio was the kind of place where nobody wanted to be. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just below conscious thought. A number system that had been broken since Tuesday and was now showing 82 when the digital board clearly said it had just called 82 10 minutes ago. The air smelled like floor cleaner and other people's frustration. Raymond Kowalski was holding number 84. He was 67 years old. He was wearing dark trousers, clean but worn at the knee, and a jacket he'd had for 11 years, a dark blue canvas thing with a collar that didn't quite lie flat. He was standing near the back wall, one hand resting against it, not leaning exactly, but not fully upright either. His weight shifted slightly, a slow and almost imperceptible sway, like a man standing on a boat that was barely moving. "Is he okay?" a woman whispered to her husband. She didn't lower her voice much. The husband glanced over. "Don't make eye contact," he said. A younger man near the window, maybe 30, in a gym shirt, looked over, looked back at his phone, and said something under his breath that got a small laugh from the man next to him. Raymond Kowalski said nothing. He found an empty seat near the far wall and sat down carefully, one hand on the armrest. Weight distributed deliberately, like a man who has learned not to trust his own balance in unfamiliar rooms. He set his folder of documents on his knee. He looked at the number board. It still said 82. On the lapel of his jacket, just below the left collar, there was a small pin, pale blue. No bigger than a shirt button. If you weren't looking for it, and nobody in that room was looking for anything except their number to be called, you wouldn't see it. Nobody saw it. Here's what nobody in that waiting room knew. Raymond Kowalski had not always moved like that. There was a time, a specific time, before a specific morning when he moved the way young men in good physical condition move, which is to say, without thinking about it at all. He had been 26 years old, a staff sergeant in 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, and he had been in Fallujah, Iraq, in November of 2004, which meant he had been in the middle of Operation Phantom Fury, the largest urban combat operation U.S. forces had conducted since the Battle of Hue City in Vietnam in 1968. You have probably heard the word Fallujah. You may have seen it in a headline once. You may not know what it actually meant for the men on the ground. The Askari district was a neighborhood in the northern part of the city. The Marines who cleared it called it the meat grinder. Insurgents had spent months preparing IEDs packed inside walls, under floorboards, behind doors that looked like every other door on every other street. Every building was a question you had to answer the hard way. Every hallway was a decision made in fractions of a second with lives on the line. Ray had been on his second tour. He knew what that kind of quiet felt like. Corporal Luis Mendez was 22 years old. He was from El Paso. He had a younger sister named Gabriela, who sent him drawings his 2 nieces made Tio Luis, they called him, in the cards he kept folded in his chest pocket. He was the kind of Marine who remembered everyone's coffee order. He was the kind of man you would want next to you. On the morning of November 19th, Ray's 4-man team was clearing a structure in the Askari district, 3rd floor, northeast corner, a building that intelligence had flagged as a weapons cache. The first 2 rooms were clean. The 3rd room had a door that was slightly too clean. No dust on the frame. Ray saw it. He called it. He pushed Mendez back. The blast came through the wall, not the door. Ray remembered the sound, or rather, he remembered the absence of sound. The way an explosion that close doesn't register as noise, but as pressure. As the world simply stopping and starting again in a different configuration. He remembered the concrete. He remembered that Mendez was down. He remembered moving toward him. He did not remember the next 4 days. 2 men from his unit were killed in that building. Ray survived with a fractured skull, bilateral hearing loss in his left ear, and a traumatic brain injury that the VA would spend the next 3 years officially documenting and the next 15 years officially underfunding. But here's the part that changes everything. What Ray did in the minutes before that blast the call he made, the position he took, the fact that he went back into that structure twice after the initial explosion to pull 2 wounded Marines out of the rubble, that is a matter of official military record. He has never once mentioned it, not in Dayton, not at the VA, not to the neighbors who see him in the parking lot and nod and look away. Stay with me. The TBI left him with what the medical reports describe as postural instability. His inner ear was permanently damaged by the concussive pressure. The fluorescent lights, the specific frequency of fluorescent lights, trigger a disorientation response that his neurologist explained once in terms Ray didn't fully follow, but that he understood in practical terms every time he had to go somewhere bright and loud and full of strangers who were not paying attention. He had learned to find walls, to stand near them, to rest one hand just lightly enough that it didn't look like he needed it. It looked, to the woman who whispered to her husband, like a man who couldn't hold himself together. It was, in fact, a man who had been holding himself together for 67 years and had simply learned where the walls were. The board changed to 83. Ray looked up. He adjusted his folder. He started to stand carefully, the way he always stood now, and that was when the woman 3 seats down looked up from her phone. Her name was Carol Haynes. She was a VA outreach coordinator who had come to the DMV on her lunch break to renew her driver's license, running 20 minutes behind because parking on Salem Avenue had been a disaster. She had been half reading emails when something made her look up. It was the PIN. She had been trained to recognize it. In 15 years working with veterans, she had seen it twice in person, once at a ceremony in Columbus, once in a photograph on a wall at the Cincinnati VA Medical Center. A pale blue star, smaller than most people imagined. The Medal of Honor lapel pin. She went very still. She looked at the man wearing it. 67 dark jacket, one hand on the armrest, waiting quietly for number 84 to be called, not drawing attention, not asking for anything. And then the truth came out. Carol leaned over, not loudly, not dramatically, just the way you lean towards someone in a library, and she said quietly, "Excuse me, is that what I think it is?" Ray looked at her. His eyes were steady. Whatever he felt, it didn't reach his face. He nodded once. Carol stood up. She didn't make a speech. She didn't point. She turned to the room and said in a clear and even voice, "I think this gentleman should go next." The clerk behind the counter, Donna, who had been watching Ray since he walked in, who had seen the way he moved and thought only that she hoped he had someone waiting for him at home, looked up and said, "Number 84, sir, I can take you right here." The young man in the gym shirt, the one who had muttered something earlier, who had gotten a small laugh from the man beside him, had looked up when Carol spoke. He looked at the pin. He opened his phone and typed something. He read for a moment. He didn't say anything. He stood up, walked to the door, and held it open. You've seen men like Raymond Kowalski. You may not have known that's what you were seeing, but you've seen them. In waiting rooms, in grocery stores, in the parking lots of VA hospitals where they sit in their cars for a few minutes before going inside, because inside is loud and bright and requires a kind of energy they are carefully managing. You've probably walked past them. We all have. Here's what Ray's story asks of you. Not demands, just asks. The first thing. The symptoms of invisible wounds look, to the untrained eye, exactly like everything we judge. Slowness, unsteadiness, silence, withdrawal. What reads as weakness is sometimes the entire architecture of a man keeping himself functional in a world that is much louder and much brighter than it was before a wall came down on him in the Ascari district in November of 2004. The second thing, The men who carry the most tend to say the least. Ray had never told a single person in Dayton what was in the velvet case in the shoebox under his bed. Not because he was ashamed, because the men who were in that building with him, the ones who didn't come home, they didn't get to talk about it either. And Ray had always felt that as long as they were quiet, he should be quiet too. The third thing is the simplest. It costs nothing. It takes 2 seconds. Look at people. Actually look at them. Not the jacket, not the unsteady walk, not the way his hands aren't quite still under the fluorescent lights. Look at the pin. And if you don't know what the pin means, look it up. What would you have done in that waiting room if you'd known? If you hadn't known? Does it change anything? Tell us in the comments. Because Raymond Kowalski waited in that plastic chair for 40 minutes, and not one person, not one, asked him if he needed a seat. He was used to it. He shouldn't have had